You know that moment when you ask your child to do something simple, and instead of just doing it, they completely fall apart? The tears, the screaming, the negotiation that somehow turns into a full-blown power struggle that leaves you exhausted, guilty, and genuinely wondering if you are doing something wrong. That feeling right there, that's not you failing as a parent. That's what happens when no one ever taught you how to raise a child who can handle the word no without their entire world collapsing. And here's what nobody tells you. The meltdowns aren't actually the problem. They are a symptom of something much deeper. Your child doesn't have the internal tools yet to regulate their emotions, and right now, every inconsistent boundary you unknowingly set is actually teaching them that the world is unpredictable, that you can't be trusted, and that if they push hard enough, the rules will change. That's terrifying when you really sit with it. But before we go deeper, I want to be upfront with you. Everything I'm sharing today is grounded in real behavioral science, child development research, and the kind of practical application that transforms homes. And for the parents who are serious about creating lasting change without spending years figuring it out through trial and error, there is a program linked in the description below. It's built specifically for this. Most parents who find it wish they had found it sooner. Some wait too long. So if you feel that pull, pay attention to it. Now let's talk about what's really happening in your home right now. Picture this. You've had a long day, you're exhausted, you tell your child it's time to turn off the screen, they beg for 5 more minutes. You say okay, 5 more minutes. 5 minutes later, same thing. You say okay, just 1 more. And somewhere in that small exchange, something much larger just happened. Your child didn't just win a negotiation, they just learned that the boundary was fake. They learned that if they push just a little bit harder, the line moves. And now their entire nervous system is wired to test every single rule you ever make, because experience has taught them that testing works. This is the invisible damage that inconsistent boundaries create. Not the meltdowns you can see, but the internal wiring you cannot see. The anxiety that builds in a child who never knows what to expect. The insecurity that grows when the people they depend on most are unpredictable. The emotional dysregulation that comes from having no stable framework for understanding what is real and what is negotiable. Research in child development is extraordinarily clear about this. Children with consistent boundaries develop stronger emotional regulation, higher frustration tolerance, better social skills, and significantly lower rates of anxiety and behavioral problems. We are not talking about minor differences here. We are talking about children who literally have different stress response systems by the time they reach adolescence, depending on whether or not they grew up with predictable, warm, consistent limits. And here's where the guilt trip you've been giving yourself needs to stop right now. Because you were never the problem. You were never taught this. Nobody sat you down and explained that every time you caved to avoid the conflict, you were actually making the conflict worse long term. Nobody told you that saying yes to end the tantrum was training your child's brain to have more tantrums. You were doing your best with the information you had. Full stop. But now you have new information. And new information requires new action. Let's talk about what the consistent boundaries method actually looks like in real life, because this is where everything changes. Imagine your child asks for something and the answer is no. In most homes, this triggers a predictable sequence. The child escalates. The parent either holds firm and feels cruel, or the parent gives in and feels defeated. Both outcomes are painful. Both outcomes are teaching the child something you don't want them to learn. The method works differently. It starts before the moment of conflict, not during it. It starts with what developmental psychologists call proactive structure, which simply means you create predictable expectations in advance so that boundaries never feel like ambushes to your child. When a child knows what to expect, their nervous system doesn't have to go into threat response mode every time they hear the word no. The no stops being a surprise attack and starts being a familiar landmark on a map they already understand. But here's the dramatic shift that most parents never see coming. When you implement this consistently, your child's meltdowns don't just decrease gradually, they often drop dramatically within days. Not because you got stricter, not because you broke their spirit, but because you gave them something their nervous system was desperately starving for: predictability. Safety. The feeling that the adult in the room actually knows what they are doing. Let's get specific about the emotional cost of not doing this, because I need you to feel this fully. A child who grows up in an environment of inconsistent boundaries doesn't just have more tantrums, they carry that experience into every relationship they will ever have. They become the teenager who cannot handle disappointment without falling apart. They become the young adult who struggles with authority, not because they are defiant by nature, but because every authority figure in their formative years confirmed that rules weren't real, that pushing back was smart strategy, and that emotional escalation was the most effective tool available. And you as the parent carry that too. The daily exhaustion of managing a child who tests everything, the anxiety of not knowing which version of your child you're going to get today. the slow erosion of your confidence as a parent until you start wondering if maybe you're just not cut out for this. That is not a personality flaw. That is the predictable outcome of a system that was never properly set up. Parents who commit to the consistent boundaries method describe the shift as nothing short of transformational. One parent described going from daily meltdowns that lasted 45 minutes to the occasional upset that resolved in under 5. Another described their child as a completely different person within 3 weeks, calmer, more cooperative, actually happier. Not because the parent became harsher, but because the child finally felt safe enough to relax. That is social proof that cannot be manufactured. That is real change happening in real homes with real children who are struggling. Now let me walk you through the 3 core pillars of this method, because you deserve the full picture. The first pillar is clarity. And this sounds obvious until you realize most parents are giving their children rules that are actually completely ambiguous. When you say things like calm down, stop being so dramatic, behave yourself, you are giving your child zero actionable information. Their nervous system is dysregulated. They need a clear, concrete instruction, not an evaluation of their emotional state. The science shows that children cannot access their problem-solving brain when they are in emotional overwhelm. So telling them to calm down while they're already in a meltdown is the equivalent of throwing a drowning person a book about swimming. Clarity means specific, simple, direct communication before the emotion peaks, not during it. The second pillar is consistency, and this is where most parents fall apart, not because they are weak, but because consistency is genuinely hard when you are tired, when you are in public, when you feel the eyes of other adults on you. Consistency doesn't mean perfection. Research shows that even an 80% consistency rate produces dramatically better outcomes than sporadic rule enforcement. What you are building is a pattern your child's nervous system can learn to predict. Every time you hold a boundary calmly, you are depositing trust into an account that pays compound interest in the form of your child's emotional development. The third pillar is warmth. And this is the one that changes everything. Because here is the critical misunderstanding that derails so many parents. Boundaries and warmth are not opposites. They are not in competition. The most emotionally resilient children in longitudinal studies across decades of research are the ones who experienced high warmth and high structure simultaneously. The parent who holds the line calmly, acknowledges the child's feelings, and doesn't waver is not being cold. They are modeling something extraordinary. They are showing their child that it is possible to feel a big feeling, stay regulated, and still function. That is the single most important emotional skill a human being can develop. And you are the one who teaches it. Here's where it gets even more powerful. When you apply all 3 pillars together with consistency, something begins to happen that you have probably never experienced before. Your child stops fighting you, not because you broke their will, not because they gave up, but because they found something more compelling than winning. They found safety. They found a parent who means what they say and says it with love, and their entire nervous system relaxes into that. The testing stops because the test has been answered. The answer is, I am the adult, I love you completely, and this is what we are doing. Parents who have been through this process describe experiencing something they thought was gone forever. Peace in their homes. Real, genuine peace. Not the quiet that comes after an exhausting battle, not the temporary calm before the next storm, but the deep, daily sustainable peace of a household where everyone knows the rules, trusts the structure, and feels genuinely connected to each other. That is what is waiting on the other side of this work. And here is the honest truth I need to tell you. This method requires nothing from you except commitment. You don't need a perfect schedule. You don't need a Pinterest-worthy home. You don't need to be endlessly patient or naturally calm. You just need to be consistent more often than you are not. That is it. That is the whole game. If you are sitting here feeling that recognition in your chest, that feeling of, yes, this is exactly what my family needs, then the program in the description below is made for you specifically. Not for parents who are coasting. Not for parents who are just curious. For parents who are ready to stop the cycle today because they understand that every week that passes without change is another week their child's nervous system is learning the wrong lessons. The parents who act on that feeling are the ones whose children look back and say, my parent changed everything. The parents who wait see their children struggle longer than they ever needed to. That choice is yours to make right now.